Hi guys, happy spring. I hope you're having a wonderful start to the season so far. For myself, we're actually coming into autumn and I'm saying goodbye to a very beautiful summer where I spent many days by the sea and gathering inspiration for new paintings. If you've seen my last video, I did spend a week recently by the sea painting, and there was this big, beautiful full moon that was rising above the ocean every night. And it really inspired me to paint this next piece I'm going to be working on in this video. As usual, I've stretched an A4 piece of watercolour paper, and here is my finished sketch because I find it really hard to sketch with the camera in my face. So this is going to be mostly the ink and painting process, which I have filmed the entirety of. This drawing came quite easily to me, and I think that was mostly due to the very simple background, which didn't need a lot of sketching or inking, but I did know that it would need substantial painting later on, which worried me a little because I am quite used to my heavily inked pieces where the inking kind of holds a lot of the structure of the painting. So I knew from the very beginning that this would be quite a trust the process kind of painting. You can see here I had Casey Robbins' live streams on while I was inking. She's doing March of the Fairies at the moment and streaming all her fairy sketching in the morning. I find it really relaxing to have on in the background with her soft voice, sketching fairies. So here I was deciding if I was gonna mask off any sparkle areas on the water, and you can see here that I've done just a little bit on the ocean and a lot of stars in the sky. This is, after all, a moonlit silhouette type of painting, so veering on the darker side of things, I didn't really need to mask a lot of areas. And now it's time for inking, so I'm using what little ink I have left from my last painting expedition where I spilled an entire bottle of black ink. Luckily, I had this backup bottle with a bit left over because I had ordered more, but it hadn't arrived yet when I was working on this piece. So I had just enough from that to finish the inking here. The inking stage of a piece is certainly the quickest for me, pretty much always, and the stage in which I feel the most certainty. I think it's because both the sketching and the painting stages I'm still figuring out a lot and seeing what areas need more of this and what shapes or colours could come into it. There's a lot more unknown in those stages, and it's not that I like the certainty more, but it is nice to break them both up either side with the inking right in the middle, where I can just trace my lines and I know where everything is going and swirl around with my ink on the page. And it always turns out pretty decently. The concept of this painting was really quite a big thing and special to me because usually I go into an artwork like this more aesthetically and I'm thinking of a certain plant or fairy I want to do and a look, but this time I was really focused on capturing a feeling that I felt when I was away, which it's the most inspired and surreal life has felt for a while, and if you're an artist, you'll know that that is quite an intimidating thing to try and paint. So usually I'd stick to something that's less abstract and a bit further removed from my emotions. Right early on though, I was quite happy with the composition of this piece. It felt very similar to how the sea looked where I was, and I think the simplicity really added to the feeling of serenity and solitude, even though there are many mermaids in the scene. Now, for my first layer of paint that I put down, my paper did not react very well. It was like a dry desert that soaked up all my water in a second so that I couldn't even move it around properly. And I was a little frustrated doing this whole layer, just wondering if I'd wrecked my paper somehow. And I still don't really know why this happened. I think it might have been because I had soaked and stretched my paper almost a month prior to this. Maybe it sitting all that time did something to it, or it might have been that I didn't have enough water in my jar and wasn't picking it up properly, because I usually dip my brush in my jar quite blindly. Maybe I wasn't putting the amount of water that I thought I was. But after that first layer, the rest of my water and paint went on perfectly, so I don't really know why that is, but it did give me a little scare at the start, especially as I knew I'd be adding so many layers to this piece to darken it a lot, which can be quite worrisome when your paper isn't reacting as normal. Now, when I say that this was a piece that I really had to trust the process for, I really mean it. With pretty much every painting, there's a point of the painting stage where I think, that's it. It's within my reach now. Like, before that, I know that I can get it to a point that I'm happy with it, but I don't really see it fully yet, if you know what I mean. And it's usually maybe halfway through the painting, sometimes a little later, that I have that moment where I feel like I can see it coming to life. For this piece, it was so close to the very end that it happened, so I really had to blindly paint and hope for the best the whole way and really trust the process. And now I know that's such a cliche, artsy sort of thing to say, like, what does trusting the process really mean? And for me, what I'd say it looks like is that there's always some area that I can work on now. Even if I don't know how to do the whole thing, find the things you do know how to do. I like to think of it sort of like a big block of ice and I'm trying to get to the center of it or reveal something underneath. It's too hard for me to chip away everything, but there'll always be some sort of weak spot, the outer edge that's melting, the top corner, somewhere that you can find that you can kind of hack away at. And by the time you've done that, there's another area that's revealed that maybe you do know how to do, or something else is melted. And I know that's a bit of a strange example, but I do think it quite encapsulates the way that I feel about it. And I think that's why I'm able to paint certain pictures that at the start feel very daunting and overwhelming for me. It's like some kind of journey where I don't really know where I'm going, but one foot in front of the other, one day at a time and all that. And with this kind of philosophy, I do find that I very rarely get really stuck because I try to keep my brush jumping around the page and chipping away little things to keep the momentum going, I guess. Now, on the negative side of this kind of let it happen and trust the process way of thinking, which I'm quite fond of, it is possible to be a little too overeager, and when we don't know the whole picture of the painting, we can make decisions that felt right at the time, but aren't really right for the painting when you look at all the elements together. Now, I've fallen into this trap quite a few times, as I've never been much of a painting planner. I don't do a lot of thumbnail compositions, I don't do a lot of tonal studies, and I don't think a whole lot before I just get in there and paint. And the thing is, I don't think I'll ever really be a really big planner. That's just not my style, but I do think there are many advantages to it. And there are a couple technical things about paintings that I feel like don't really inhibit my freedom too much, but can help me a lot in making a painting more impactful, and I have implemented them quite a bit into my workflow lately. And they are composition and tone, and how both of those together can really draw the eye and create clear silhouettes and an easy to understand painting. I do think I've talked about composition quite a lot before, so I might just touch on tone and what I was doing in this piece, for example. I don't think it's very important to know every single detail of the whole painting and how you're going to accomplish that, but right from the start, it is a good idea to know what areas are going to be the darkest, what areas are going to be the lightest, and constantly making little decisions about darks and the lights as you go in a painting. So whenever I want a part of the painting, an object, a character to be quite readable, then there's got to be some difference of tone between them and the thing next to them. So for example, the top mermaid in this painting had to stand apart from the background. So I decide who's going to be lighter and who's going to be darker. In this case, the reflection of the moon is behind her, so the mermaid is going to be darker and she's in shadow. But it's not always so simple, and it does change even within a character. So the mermaid directly below her is reaching out, and I wanted her hair to be darker than the background so that we can read that she is there. But then I didn't want her arm to get lost in the rocks. And so I decided to make the arm lighter than the rock, but the hair darker than the background. And it doesn't have to be this way for every single thing, but certainly for main characters, main aspects of the painting, or just parts that you want to be very readable, it's a good idea to keep the tone in mind and how they're all interacting, particularly to preserve the lightness of the paper as watercolours get darker and darker and it is harder to bring lighter colours back. And I'm just taking the masking fluid off those stars and the moon, and now I'm cleaning up some of the edges and lifting some of the paint from around the moon to give it a soft glow. The main reason I found this painting quite trickier than normal, even with its simplistic composition, is the fact that it was a moonlit nighttime painting, which I don't know if I've ever really done one to this extent. I wanted it to be very grounded in reality and feel like a moonlit scene, but also make sure that the elements worked for me and what I wanted romantically, and to have all these mermaids in the foreground with the characters and the colour differences and a lot of these little details going on, but also maintain this idea that they were in silhouetted shadow. So I had a bunch of references with me, pictures I'd taken myself and moonlit scenes, and even some lovely illustrations by some old artists that I admire. But the way I ended up thinking of it was the foreground had all the usual colour and tonal differences, but the entirety of the foreground was a lot darker than normal and more blue toned. So I ended up doing a bunch of washes of blue on top and leaving everything less saturated than I normally would, so that standing back and looking from afar, it looked just like the shadows of the moon. I did end up bringing in some coloured pencils just on top to finish it off. I really liked the warm glow I was able to give the moon and the stars and just the edge of the reflection in the water. And it also just helped me to even out some colours, make some of the shadows a little cooler and sharpen up some edges. And the title of my painting was very clear to me from the beginning. So I wrote that down and the piece was finished. Thanks very much for being here and coming along while I talked you through my painting. If you would like a print of A Mermaid Moon, they're up in my shop right now. The link is down below, and I hope you have a wonderful few weeks until I see you again. Goodbye!